I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss the Russian retreat from Snake Island, get the latest from the final day of the NATO summit in Madrid, and we interrogate the CCTV footage from the site of the strike on the mall in Kremenchuk.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Thursday, the 30th of June, day 127. And today I'm joined by Russia correspondent Nataliya Vasilyeva and, joining us from the NATO summit in Madrid, Defence and Security editor Dominic Nicholls. I started by asking Dom and Nataliya for the latest updates from the Black Sea.
I think it's important to say that Snake Island has been in headlines for quite a while. We heard, of course, from the Ukrainian side of heavy bombings. The Ukrainians have been hard targeting Snake Island for a few days already. And the Ukrainian command reported this morning that Russia retreated from the island. The Ministry of Defense confirmed the report, but it's quite unusual how they chose to describe it. They describe it as a goodwill gesture, saying that the site was strategic, but it has, quote, fulfilled its function. And they did admit that it was difficult to hold due to constant attack from Ukraine.
Dom Nicholls, do you want to add to that? What's the strategic significance of this retreat?
Well, I'd say that, I do one of these rare occasions when I agree with Russia. This is a goodwill gesture, just not the way they intended it, I don't think. I think this is very, very important. We've spoken many times on this pod about Snake Island and how it confers a huge advantage to whichever side holds it. Russia needed to hold it in order to provide an air defence umbrella and a sea defence umbrella for any forces that then might go and try and push on to an amphibious assault in Odessa and to control the southern coastline of Ukraine. Ukraine needed to hold it not only to push that back and to remove the threat to Odessa, but also in order to impose their own protection zone to try and get the grain out. And so this is, I think, a very significant moment, because if Russia is saying that they can't hold on to it anymore, and we think that's likely happened because of the inflow of heavy weapons, so HIMARS, but also the French Caesar 155mm self-propelled guns, other MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems that have gone into the coastline, so not on Snake Island itself, but along the southern coast of Ukraine. If they have forced the Black Sea fleet to have to stay so far away that they can't provide protection to Snake Island, then that is very significant. If that chops out a portion of the northwest corner of the Black Sea in which the Russian fleet can't operate, then that is significant. Not only because it then might unlock this way of getting the grain out. There's still a long way to go there. We'll talk about that in a moment. But this is the necessary first step to do that. But also, if this stymies Putin's plan to control the south of the country, and in particular Odessa, then that absolutely takes away or massively reduces the risk of the country not being able to feed itself, i.e. not being an economically viable sovereign state. If the economy was so denied because it didn't have access to the coastline, out of which much of the economy flows, or through which much of the money is generated into the economy, then that is very significant. So if this is signaling that Russia are no longer, or for now at least, able to push west from where they currently are, just north of Crimea, around Kherson, that area, push west through Mykolaiv onto Odessa, that is very significant indeed.
And Nataliya, can I just come to you? How has the news of Russia's retreat from Snake Island been received in Russia? What's the reaction been?
Sure. Obviously, if you speak about state media, they are pretty much towing the Kremlin line, saying that we have retreated this tiny island and it doesn't really hold any significance anymore. But I think it's quite notable how ultra-conservative commentators have been reacting, including Igor Girkin, a man who was quite prominent in 2014 when the war first started in eastern Ukraine, as some of our listeners might know, Girkin has been quite critical of the Russian command in the way they are conducting the war. Not in the fact that the war is being waged, but in the fact that to him, the Russia's army is not ambitious enough, and it should be pretty much carpet bombing the entire country. So he has quite a large social media following, and he's been posting a number of messages, and he clearly sounded quite upset, describing it as a political defeat for Russia, which shows that the Kremlin is really not interested in a major, in overtaking Ukraine, in a major victory in Ukraine, as ultra-nationalist figures like him would wish it to be.
Can I just come to you, Dom? So we've seen there's some news today that a top US intelligence official has said that the picture for the war in the rest of Ukraine remains, quote, pretty grim. So could you just give us a quick overview of what's happening elsewhere away from the Black Sea?
Well, I mean, it is pretty grim. It's still very artillery-led, still very heavy fires around the Lysychansk area. We think Lysychansk, so this is the town just to the west of Severodonetsk, in that pocket in the east of the Donbass. Lysychansk is over the other side of the river, and it's slightly higher ground, so easier to defend. But Russia have been making these slow incremental gains. I mean, the number of times we said slow incremental gains, it speaks of how long it's taken Russia to make any advances here. But they have. They are, as Ben Wallace said to us yesterday here in Madrid at the NATO summit, he said they are making meters a day, occasionally kilometers, but nothing like the mass breakout that they should have done with the forces they've massed. And they've taken forces from elsewhere in the country, particularly the north, to try and bolster this push into the Donbass. So it's come at a huge cost to them. Ben Wallace yesterday was talking about 25,000 dead Russians. Now that these figures are slightly debatable, because firstly, I mean, as they say themselves, Ben Wallace and the MOD said they don't actually know. They're not able to count every single one, but that is quite a significant number. And he was keen to stress that was dead, and the standard metric is 3 to 1 for dead to wounded. So that implies another 75,000 wounded and removed from the battlefield. So if there's 100,000 Russians been taken off the battlefield, and we think they started with about 180,000, I mean that they've just not got many people left, and that explains, we think, in some way why it's been so slow in the east. However, they have made advances. We think they're around to the south and possibly the southwest of Lysychansk. We think that town is going to be, if not cut off, if they don't get the Ukrainian forces out of there, and they thought to be about 15,000 civilians, then that town is likely to fall to Russian forces in the very near future, and that will effectively be the rest or the whole of the Luhansk Oblast. Now, as I've said before, there's still a very long way to go before the Donbass is taken. There's a huge chunk of the Donetsk Oblast, the region to the south, that is still not held by Russia. So still a long way to go for Russia to claim they've taken the Donbass, but it does look like this slow, grinding, attritional, heavy artillery-led push in the east is going to bear fruit for Russia with Lysychansk. So the US assessment is I think correct. It's a very grim. Ukraine is taking a lot of casualties. That they may have been able to slightly sort of slow the tide with the inflow of heavy weapons and the training that's going on. The Snake Island might be the most obvious, the most recent and most obvious large example of this. If they're able to knit these small tactical gains into something much larger, then that could develop into a general counterattack. However, for now, I think it's fair to say that they are hanging on, and the inflow, as we said right at the start of this podcast series, that there's a race going on here between how quickly the weapons can get in there against how quickly Russia can advance and deny Ukraine the ability to survive economically, survive as a country, to fight it. And that's still very much in the mix. So there's some tactical successes here by Ukraine, but I think that is a fair assessment by the US defense intelligence community that it is still very, very grim and much in the balance.
Thanks, Dom. And just to give our listeners an idea of the intensity of the fighting, there's a quote here from Governor Serhiy Gaidai from Luhansk, who says, "Fighting is going on all the time. The Russians are constantly on the offensive. There is no let-up. Absolutely everything is being shelled." So that just gives you a sense of just the sheer ferocity of the fighting in the east at the moment. Dom Nicholls, can I stay with you? You're on the ground for the Telegraph in Madrid at the NATO summit. What's happening there? What's the big news you can tell our listeners?
So I've just come out of a press conference with Boris Johnson. Everything was delayed, so I've had to just scoot out of Joe Biden's speech. In fact, I was the last person out before they shut the doors to come and speak on this podcast. So putting the potty ahead of the President of the United States. Here we go. But so I was with Boris Johnson. He was talking about the summit here. He was saying that the Allies are very resolute, that he didn't put any details on any new weapons or money or anything like that for Ukraine. However, he did say that after the war, and he was talking in terms of Ukraine surviving, he wouldn't describe what winning or victory or anything like these terms what they might look like, but he was saying that after the war, it's then up to NATO to provide heavy equipment, so NATO equipment and training and intelligence. He specifically mentioned intelligence, which I thought was an interesting adjunct there. He also said the big announcement from Boris Johnson was that he said that in British defence spending, which is currently, depending how you cut the cloth, but let's say, and the latest figures I had from the MOD was we're at about 2.12% of GDP, national income. The NATO baseline, you may remember, is 2%. However, of the 30 nations in the alliance, only 9 currently meet that 2% figure. However, so Boris Johnson was saying that the figure will go up to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. Now, yesterday, the MOD was tweeting saying that, and Boris Johnson said that the British defence British defence spending was 2.3%. However, he has included in that figure the £1 billion that was announced yesterday for Ukraine and all the other military support for Ukraine. That's all wrapped up and popped in the figure. You go from about 2.12 up to 2.3. So that was a little bit cute, you could say. However, I've been assured, I tweeted out about an hour ago that I was sceptical of this 2.5% figure by the end of the decade. Bearing in mind that would take the spending up to about £74.5 billion. That is a huge amount of money. So I was a little bit sceptical of the 2.5 figure. And I had a very senior defence source come straight back and say, no, whilst they accept that the 2.3% figure that Boris Johnson was talking about yesterday and the MOD were tweeting, whilst they accept that that does include all the Ukraine aid, the 2.5% will not only because we hope we're not still supporting Ukraine to this degree at the end of the decade. We hope the war will be over and there'll be a sovereign, independent, viable Ukrainian state. But the point was that the 2.5% is cash for British defence rather than wrapping up all the other bits and pieces as well. If that's the case, that is a massive figure. It will have to go around through the spending round. There's still going to be, as MOD like to call it, the knife fight in a phone box with the Treasury about who gets which bits of the pot. And of course, we're talking percentages. So a lot of it depends on the economy. If the economy goes down, then the percentage figure might actually be achieved sooner than you think. If the amount of cash that Ben Wallace has secured, the extra 24 billion for the next, now 3 years, it goes in as it does, that's sort of baked in. So the percentage might go up artificially if the economy drops. But let's take it at face value. The British defence spending going up to 2.5% of GDP by the financial year 29-30 is a huge amount of money, £74.5 billion extra, likely to go on things like the Future Combat Air System and maybe some other big items. But that is a big figure, and I was very glad to have been able to sort out whether or not that was the Ukraine aid was included in that. I'm not listening to the Joe Biden speech at the moment. I will catch it afterwards. He's downstairs now. I'll go and grab one of the screens shortly, and I'll be able to give you an update on that tomorrow.
Thanks, Tom. And just for our listeners, what's on your agenda for the rest of the summit? Are there any other stories that people should be thinking of or looking out for?
So the summit's going to close. The summit actually has officially closed. So Jens Stoltenberg, he spoke about an hour and a half ago. He formally closed the summit, and he was hammered in questions about the new NATO model, this 300,000, the high readiness force. NATO at the moment has a high readiness force of about 40,000, held at varying notices to move, and we all kind of understand what that is. So today, HMS Prince of Wales, one of Britain's second aircraft carrier, is acting as the flagship for the NATO maritime force. So we are already in there, and it's doing it and stuff. But earlier on this week, or a couple of days ago, NATO said that high readiness force was going up to 300,000, and we all went, "Well, crikey, where's all that going to come from? Who's going to supply that?" If you've got a very firm figure, albeit it's a nice round figure with lots of zeros, but you've put a figure on it, 300,000. There surely must have been some work to say, right, well, we're likely to get this from the US, and we're going to get this from Britain and France, and all the other allies are going to put this in. And it turns out, no, they're about to start that work, and it's up to the incoming new Supreme Allied Commander Europe, who's coming in, I think, the next week, actually. He's then going to do a whole load of work to decide what the ask is, what the problem set is, and therefore what he needs to have in his locker to address those problems. So this figure of 300,000 seems like a complete misnomer, and it's going to roll on that one. But we were asking Jens Stoltenberg in questions, but they've really sort of fudged and ummed and erred quite a lot. So more to come on that is all I can say. However, that did officially end this NATO summit in Madrid, except that we then had various national leaders speaking. So we all sort of rushed off to the UK section to listen to Boris Johnson, and other national leaders were speaking in there, little bits and pieces. Interestingly, President Erdogan of Turkey is going to be we think the last person to speak here. It's supposed to be now, but it will be after President Biden, and that's going to be very interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, to talk about the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO and the deal that was done there that we talked about on yesterday's pod, but also whether or not, in the light of the news from Snake Island and this bizarre statement from Russia saying that they're now happy for under a UN plan to allow the maritime grain corridors to be established. Anything that happens in the Black Sea is probably going to be under the direction of Turkey. They'll be most likely given that task. Probably not as a NATO task. It might just be Turkey, possibly the other Black Sea facing countries, Bulgaria, Romania. Although they're all NATO members, this wouldn't be a NATO mission. But if there's the green light now to start planning for some kind of humanitarian maritime corridor, Turkey, as custodians of the Montreux Convention, which describes who can go through the Bosphorus Strait and into the Black Sea in times of conflict. So Turkey own that. They're most likely to be in the lead for any action in the next, or any planning that starts now about a maritime humanitarian corridor. So that's what or certainly I, if I get a chance, my aching arm, having it in the air, trying to get Boris Johnson's attention. If I get a question, that's what I'm going to be asking President Erdogan of Turkey as soon as Joe Biden finishes speaking downstairs.
Well, thank you very much, Dom, and thank you for your reporting at the summit. Nataliya, can I just ask, so Dom's been there for several days now, reporting for us every day at the NATO summit. Has the NATO summit made the Russian news? And if so, how is it being reported on?
I think it's quite interesting that in the past 4 months that the war has been going on, and in the run-up to the war, Russian officials have talked a lot about NATO and its eastward expansion as something that, to quote Foreign Minister Lavrov, represent an existential threat to Russia. Now that we know that NATO is actually going to expand even further, coverage in Russian state media has been quite surprising in the way that it was not portrayed as a defeat of Russia's foreign policy, as one might think, because obviously because of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, NATO is going to move even closer to Russian borders, and especially if it comes to Finland, which has quite a lengthy border with Russia. So instead, Russian state media focused on what they describe as constant pressure from the US on its allies in Europe and on Turkey. So they made quite a big deal of the agreement reached between Turkey and Sweden and Finland, implying that, or sometimes even saying it just directly, that Turkey has been pressured into the deal, that also Sweden has been pressured by the US to make concession to Turkey, so that NATO is going to expand further. And there was also this funny moment when on Russian state TV, on one of the main TV channels, they started discussing the menu at the summit. I'm sure Dom would know better whether it was a menu at the canteen or it was something that, I don't know, dignitaries and members of the delegation were offered. But anyhow, there was a Russian salad on the menu. And some Russian commentators somehow decided to make a big deal out of it, describing it as cultural appropriation and also a sign that the German potato salad is going to be the staple food in Germany, as Germany and German people are going to suffer from high energy prices and are going to have to save on everything, including food.
Dom, Nicholls, can you confirm that for us? What's the menu been like at the NATO summit?
Well, I could confirm the Russian salad has been on. I haven't partaken of it myself, but that, I think that was mainly because I've just been rushing around. But yeah, no, Russian salad. I should actually have a plate of Russian salad, freedom fries and chicken Kiev, but there we go. I'll probably get thrown out if I ask for that. No, it's been all right. It's been a big old setup here. It's a big old jamboree, this thing. Thousands of people here. We're mostly corralled up in the media suite, which is the size of everything's compared to the size of a football field. This is I think it's basically half the size of Belgium as far as I can see it. But no, it's been okay. It's been a lot of frantic stuff. There's a trick, an art to summiting, which I've not mastered by any stretch of the imagination, but you have to be prepared for long periods of nothing happening, and then you've got to sprint across this vast cavern of sort of media stuff with wires everywhere and leads and God knows what, because somebody's appeared somewhere. The foreign minister of some countries appeared somewhere for a fleeting engagement, a quick sort of chat to the press, and then they're gone. I mean, I said yesterday that when the Telegraph interviewed Vitaly and Vladimir Klitschko a couple of days ago, we managed to set that up, and so we knew they were coming in and had a quiet area arranged just by the doors. But as soon as we sort of released them, not we could have stopped them, quite frankly, but after our 10 minutes were up, they then headed off just for a quick walk around the hall. I mean, it was like a feeding frenzy. Everyone, it was just mobbed. So yeah, I've not quite mastered summitry. People just keep rushing off in all sorts of directions, and I have no idea what's going on while I'm just sat there typing stuff out and merrily sort of looking around. So I haven't had a huge amount of time to go and have a look at the menu. I will go and look in a sec, because I haven't had any lunch yet, but we're all just about wrapped up. Joe Biden's just finished speaking. I'm looking at the screens here. He's just finished speaking. People are coming back to life, bashing the keys furiously. So something's happened. He's obviously said something which I've completely missed for you. I can only apologise for that. I'll go and find out what it is, and I promise to be a better summiteer in the future.
Thanks, Tom. Nataliya, can we turn to you? You've written a big piece recently about the Kremenchuk shopping centre attack. You've been looking at the CCTV footage surrounding the area. Can you tell us what you found, and why it's significant?
Well, I think it's very important, to use the tools of the 21st century, because obviously this is 2022, and there's so much that, so many details, so much evidence that you can find from CCTV, from social media posts, from anything else that's actually publicly available and which is all open source data. So basically, we started thinking about doing that story because it took a while for Russia to claim responsibility for the attack. They did say that they targeted Kremenchuk, but they insisted that there was no missile strike on the shopping mall. The Russian Defense Ministry said they actually hit a warehouse nearby, and they alleged that there was Western provided ammunition and weapons at the warehouse, and those weaponry caught fire, and then that's how the fire started at the shopping mall. Now, we have an extensive amount of drone footage as well as CCTV footage that completely debunks this theory. First off, if you look at drone footage, you can clearly see that there is something that looks like a blast area. The entire central section of the shopping mall, if you have an bird eye view, which we have thanks to drone footage, You see that the entire central section of the mall is completely destroyed. The roof has collapsed, and it does look like something actually fell into that place. Now, there's actually there's a lot of other video evidence, and one of the most helpful things that I was able to find is several CCTV clips posted from two different locations. Russians did admit that they launched a missile strike on Kremenchuk. They didn't say how many missiles they sent, but from open source data that we saw, we can see that there were definitely two missile strikes and not one, and that there was one missile strike that hit the mall directly. There's a video, there's a CCTV video that actually shows the missile flying right into the shopping mall, and if you make a screen grab, you can even see the contours of the missile. You see that it is actually hitting the shopping mall. And second piece of evidence is CCTV footage from a nearby park. And you can see quite astonishing scenes there, obviously. And those videos, because it's not just one, those clips, they start in quite an unusual manner, because you see people running around this very nice looking green park in the middle of a hot summer day. So people are running for cover, but you don't really see why they're running for cover. And in one of those videos, in the background, you can see some gray smoke towering somewhere in the distance. And then a seconds later, you can see like a flash of light, and the entire landscape starts shaking. And this is when the second missile strike happens. And if also, I was able to correlate that with, if you look at the maps, you can see where the industrial area is. You can see the park, and it's quite clear that people from the park, they heard the first explosion, then they saw the smoke coming in from the shopping mall. And apparently they decided to look for cover. They started running away, and this is when we saw the second explosion, the second missile strike that hit the industrial area. So there's quite a lot to prove that Russia's explanation about a single strike on the ammunition depot is completely baseless.
Thank you very much, Nataliya, for that. I've just got a question from a listener, which I think is appropriate for now. So thank you very much, Jevon, for sending this in. He says, in light of the recent missile attack in Kremenchuk, does Ukraine need missile defence systems like the Patriot, or is Ukraine simply too large to cover? Dom Nicholls, would you like to talk a little bit to this?
Yeah, sure. The answer is yes to both of those. Yes, Ukraine does need them, but yes, it's too large to cover. Now, you've got to be aware of what we're talking about when we talk about these missile defense systems. The most obvious one that people reach for, the most obvious diagram, is the Iron Dome that Israel uses. But essentially, it's almost impossible to protect an entire country or even a very large area. And so most of these missile defenses are able to put together a pretty decent umbrella over an area. But those areas are it's what's called point defense. So it's a small area. It's a large collection of troops, or it's a very important piece of equipment, or a headquarters, or a major seat of political or industrial economic power. So it's very difficult to have to cover an entire country or an entire battlefront with air defences. And you wouldn't want to anyway. I mean, you wouldn't want to put this very expensive, very sophisticated equipment out that's a target in its own right, if all it's doing is protecting smaller troop concentrations, or dare I say it, less valuable parts of your military machine. If you had the luxury of the money to cover everything, of course, I think you would do. But that's just not reasonable in this day and age, I don't think. So yes, it is important to have these defences, and we saw recently that the NASAMS, the Norwegian surface-to-air missile system, is going into Ukraine. There's no talk yet, I don't think, of the US Patriot system, although I think the Norwegian system is very similar, and Norway make the launcher and the control system, and the US are supplying the AMRAAM, the Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air missile that actually goes or comes out of the tubes. So it's a Norwegian system, but with an American munition. That is very, very capable. That's going in, but yeah, it is a numbers game. I'm afraid you can't protect everything all the time. You've got to be very selective about what you protect, and when you do it, when you are moving, you need to be able to coordinate all this so that you protect your headquarters as it shifts position, just the same as you'd want to protect any of your major sort of population centres all the time. Obviously, they're not going to move, but you need to move the defending air defence systems around so that they're not just a fixed target that can then be destroyed themselves. So it is tricky. It's expensive. It's an art in itself, and it's there is more required in Ukraine, I think, and more is flowing in. But again, it seems to be that Ukraine at the moment, they are calling for surface-to-air missile shields. However, their big call is for artillery and more anti-tank rounds, but artillery in particular.
Thank you very much for that, Dom. I've just got another quick question from Cal, who writes, the Russians' bombing of Mariupol's maternity hospital, the theatre labelled with the word children, and the train station in Kramatorsk, not to mention the carpet bombing of cities, don't give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. He's asking, given the context of this war, given the context of past Russian military actions, should we even be given, should we extend the benefit of the doubt to what the Russian military claims at all? I'm just wondering what you'd say to Cal, Dom and Nataliya.
I'm sure if I may add, I think there are 2 points that we've heard recently, and obviously, I wouldn't really want to go into the moral aspect of it, of bombing innocent civilians and clearly civilian targets. There's no doubt about that. But I think there are 2 moments which are important to stress that have been pointed out by military analysts. First is most recently we've been seeing that Russia's attacks are getting indiscriminate, and we're 4 months into the war, and there's a suggestion that Russia has used so much of its high precision weapons. It did have a lot of high precision weapons, that it's quite possible that they are running off high precision weapons, and they might as well be targeting something else and then landing 1 kilometer away and striking this innocent shopping center. And the second point is something that I heard early on in the war, when, for example, there was a shopping mall in Kiev that was bombed, and a couple of other sites, which would be, like former industrial sites converted into a shopping mall, a former factory or something like that, sort of post-industrial legacy turned to civilian use. That has led many observers to believe that in some cases Russia may be guided by outdated maps, and it could actually be using maps which are several decades old, that would show that there is this military factory in Kiev, and maybe they wouldn't even bother checking that it has turned into a co-working space or a shopping mall. So these are two points I just wanted to point out.
Thank you, Nataliya. That gives us, I think, some useful context. Dom, do you want to comment on this as well?
I don't think there is any benefit of the doubt anymore. And by benefit of the doubt, I mean doubt that they are professional military planners that know what they're doing and are thinking about what they want to hit, doing correct what we call weapon to target matching, or what I used to call weapon to target matching, i.e. picking the right munition for the effect you want to achieve, and not just chucking heavy artillery and high explosive around the place, which is what they seem to do. And I was messaged by a listener who thought I gave Russia too easy a pass yesterday when we were talking about the shopping centre attack, and saying that I left room to say Russia may have thought they were aiming at a target that had legitimate military value. However, I made the point yesterday, and I reiterate it again today, that they then didn't take that thought through, and to say, well, we should use a lower yield or a more precise weapon. So I wasn't giving them an easy ride yesterday. I was saying it's just as unprofessional to use the wrong weapon as it is to not be absolutely on the ball when it comes to your targeting processes. So no, I don't think there's any room for the doubt. Now we've seen what they are. We've seen that they don't care about the collateral damage, civilian deaths. They don't care about destroying infrastructure, even though most of that would be classified as a war crime under international law. And so I don't think there's room for giving them any more benefit of the doubt now.
Well, thank you, Dom, and thank you, Nataliya, for that. And thank you, Jevon and Cal, for your thoughts and your questions. Just to anybody listening, please, of course, do message and do send us your questions as well. We do try and get at least some of them in. Well, before I ask for your final thoughts, Dom, you've had a look at what Joe Biden's been speaking about in the conference that you were just shut out of. What did the American president say?
Well, I haven't been having a look at it, but I managed to collar Telegraph Brussels correspondent Supremo Joe Barnes on his way out, and he's with me now. So Joe's able to, he was in the room. He's able to give you the update from Biden's speech.
So far too kind, Dom, and hi, folks. So Joe Biden stressed, and his kind of message was, he sent kind of directly to Vladimir Putin, was that what you have done in Ukraine has achieved exactly the opposite of what you were trying to. Before the war, Vladimir Putin was saying, look, this is all about NATO. I don't want more NATO kind of expanding onto the Russian border. But now what has happened? He's got more NATO on his border. He's got another 800 miles of NATO border when Sweden and Finland join. But then, so the headline kind of announcements that Joe Biden was then keen to make was his support is going to be in the long run for Ukraine. He's going to back Ukraine for as long as it takes. And that is a message that NATO leaders shared. They won't kind of reiterate on it because there are obviously some fears that Boris Johnson has kind of stressed that some like European nations might look for an early exit and a kind of a bad and sloppy peace deal that doesn't do Ukraine any favours. But Joe Biden, much as President Zelensky asked NATO leaders yesterday, has delivered. He's announced another $800 million for weapons, and so is what Dom was speaking about. There is a new announcement for air defence systems. He wouldn't elaborate on them, but there has obviously been some kind of suggestion that America for a while is going to start sending its kind of heavy air defence systems. We don't know yet, but he said announcements in the coming days. There's going to be more multi-launch rocket system rockets, more kind of artillery for those, and anti-battery radar. So give the Ukrainian military kind of help in tracking down where it's being fired at from long range. And kind of to give you a kind of bit of atmosphere in the room, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, he was really heavily nodding along when these weapons were being kind of read out and kind of the package of assistance was being announced. So it kind of maybe that gives you an idea of who's driving the American kind of approach to this, who is behind the policy. And then so a bit kind of elsewhere, there's some amusing, funny bits, because obviously we kind of see Joe Biden as this kind of gaffe-prone president. He managed, when he was announcing that Finland and Sweden were set to join, he accidentally confused Sweden and Switzerland, two neutral European countries.
That would be news.
But so Switzerland, much to Switzerland's delight, will stay neutral and keep out of NATO. And then the other thing is, a lot of the American journalists in the room were pressing him, Joe Biden, on the cost of living crisis in America. So fuel prices is apparently at $5 a gallon in much across the states, and they were saying, look, what are you going to do about it? You're going to go to the sea. You're going to ask the Saudi Arabians to kind of up oil production to kind of bring down this. Are you going to change your policy of hitting Russia with sanctions, especially on kind of oil and gas and other energy supplies? And he was like, no, look, what we have to realise, Biden said, what we have to realise is this is going to drive energy prices up. It's not what we're doing. It's not what Western sanctions are doing. This is Vladimir Putin's doing and his war in Ukraine. And that is why that he is saying the West and America especially are in it for the long run, because they think freedom is a price worth paying. And they think that actually by defeating Russia and Vladimir Putin, it will then start to stabilise the world economy.
Well, thank you very much, Joe Barnes, for that. So just for Joe, Nataliya and Dom, can I just ask, if you're Ukrainian listening to this and listening to the news of what Boris Johnson said, what Joe Biden's been saying today, to my ears anyway, this sounds extremely positive. They're in it for the long haul and they're promising lots of heavy weapons. Is that a fair view of what's been said and promised?
I think it is. I think in terms of takeaways from this summit, we were surprised on the Tuesday evening with the news that the deal had been brokered between NATO and Turkey over Sweden and Finland's accession to the group. That'll take the alliance up to 32 members. So that came early. We were hoping / slightly expecting that was going to be the big deliverable here on the last day. So in many ways, yesterday was almost a bit flat, but that's because there was such good news on the first day. However, I think if you're a Ukrainian looking at what the NATO summit is, I think you've got to be pleased with what they're what's come out of this. All the right messaging, the leaders are saying the right things and backing it up with numbers in certain areas. The big deal about Turkey, and then Joe Biden finishing today with the $800 million, the next tranche of money, of support for Ukraine. So there were no dissenting voices. There were no sort of sidebar conversations with some countries saying, well, maybe we've got to start thinking about this. There was none of that. It was completely unified. And that's not always a given at these things. I mean, there's 30 members here, and that's 30 members with all the entourage of spokespeople and sources and the foreign side, the defence side, the politics side. So there's a lot of people here, a lot of room for journalists to pick up, slightly dissenting voice over here. There hasn't been any of that, really. It's been very, very unified, and I don't think that can be manufactured. It's just not a human skill to be able to do that on such a scale. So I think this is a positive conference event as far as NATO are concerned, and in particular for Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't the only reason this was here. Please don't forget that. This was to launch NATO's new strategic concept about how and where and why it's going to fight in the future, what's important to it. And interestingly, just a quick final note, for the first time in a major NATO document, they've addressed China, and not saying China is there's going to be open conflict, but saying that there's some room for competition and challenge, and the contest of ideas and values with China is going to be a feature for the future. But no, this has been a fascinating NATO summit, and I think over the next few days we'll see more considered or time for various national governments to really take stock of what's happened here and come out with more statements. But I think that the hot take from here is that it was a good summit as far as Ukraine is concerned.
Thank you very much, Dom Nicholls there in Madrid at the NATO summit. Dom and Nataliya, can I just get your final thoughts then? What should our listeners be thinking of and looking to in the days ahead?
Yeah, if I could, Dom has got us covered, I think. But just one quick final remark that I have is I can definitely understand the optimism that Dom has just mentioned. But from what I'm hearing in Ukraine, from what ordinary people are saying, from what activists and officials are saying, there's optimism, but it's quite cautious because there have been a lot of promises made before. New weaponry is arriving, but also it's not arriving as quickly as it could or in exactly the sufficient amount. So I think Ukrainians are optimistic, but cautiously optimistic.
For several days now, Dominic Nicholls has been at the NATO summit in Madrid. He's been talking to world leaders, asking questions in press conferences. And the other day, he managed to get a couple of minutes with two Ukrainians who almost need no introduction, Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko, former professional boxer who held the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship twice, and his brother Vitaly Klitschko, also a boxer, but now is the mayor of Kyiv.
So, Messrs. Klitschko, thank you so much for making the time to come and talk to the Telegraph. May I ask, what are you hoping to achieve out of the next couple of days?
I'm very happy to listen to the support of Ukraine from members of NATO. All members declare friendship, declare support, and we very appreciate and we understand without support of NATO and the democratic countries, it will be difficult to survive. And that's why one more time I want to say thank you very much for everyone, for political support, economic support, and defensive weapon delivering in Ukraine. I want to say defensive because we defend our country, and it's very important right now, modern weapons to have in Ukraine.
We saw that appalling attack yesterday on the supermarket. How resilient is Ukrainian society at the moment? Will it take many more of these attacks, or is there any way that society will try and seek a resolution to this war because these attacks are happening all the time?
Just 3 days ago, the Russian rockets destroyed apartment buildings in our hometown. The second rocket coming in kindergarten, in preschool. Thanks God was Sunday, no children were there. It's nobody died, but in the building 6 people was injured, 1 people killed from Russian attack. It's the last bad news from capital of Ukraine. Just yesterday, more than 20 people died. 40 people disappeared, and the numbers of people who is injured more and more in Kremenchuk, and no reason. It's shopping mall to destroy it, and Russians lie. The Russians lie, they told exactly the same. Borodyanka, Hostomel, Irpin, Bucha, it was fake. Yesterday the shopping mall also fake. The Russians lie, always. They lie when they make invasion and call that special operation against Ukrainian forces, and we see how many civilians died, destroyed in Mariupol, Kharkiv, in other cities, Chernihiv, just in capital of Ukraine, destroyed more than 300 buildings, 220 residential apartments.
Now, Mr. Klitschko, you in the recent past, you have called for your people not to come back to Kyiv and to other areas of Ukraine. You say it's not safe. People are coming back in their thousands. They naturally want to go home. What is your message now to those that have had to leave their homes because of the war?
My priority to support the people, to give the security, and I told to everyone is his personal risk if they came back to our hometown. Kyiv was target and still target of Russian aggressors. If you ready to take a risk, welcome. If not, stay outside of the country.
How useful are events such as this? Do they really matter? Do they make things change, or is this just Western leaders coming together and feeling good about themselves?
Today is big celebration. It's Constitution Day in Ukraine. I want to remind in our constitution declarate association with the European Union and association with NATO. We actually became candidates for European Union. Is very important for us because the reason of this senseless war is our wish to be the modern democratic European country. And also member of NATO for Ukraine is very important because neutral status is collective safety is main priority for our country. We always will be neighbor from Russian Federation. Russia always was aggressive to all neighbors, always.
So the talk of security guarantees, you think is
security guarantees for us very important. We have to stop this war. We have to kick the Russian soldier out from our territory, and the NATO status for us is main priority.
And how is President Zelensky?
President Zelensky ruins the country, and huge responsibility right now for him, and it's not easy task to be the president of country in the war.
Or mayor of the city. That can't be easy.
It's true.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave a review as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly with us by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and today on Twitter, Sophie Coe.